Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Hello, and welcome to Dark Poutine. With me across the table, Matthew Stockton.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, look, creepy Matthew.
Creepy Matthew.
You've got your little goth outfit on and your bat wings. I'm very impressed. And makeup and the whole schmear, so...
There you go.
Yeah, I'm dressed as a ghost. I've got a sheet just thrown over my head.
It's hard to talk with these fake teeth in. Yeah, see?
Matthew's fake plastic teeth. I thought you'd go a little more expensive with those, but I guess the fake plastic is more camp.
Yeah, exactly. Camp is Christmas.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Our content is often intense and some listeners may find it disturbing. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We are ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque. Grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine Halloween style.
We are such stuff as poutine is made of.
This should be a spooky one. But before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to mention that this is a special episode. But not in the 1980s after-school special kind of way, but special nonetheless. I've been excitedly looking forward to it for a while now. Not only is it our annual spooky-themed Halloween episode, it's also the 4th anniversary of Dark Poutine, as the first show, The Mystery of the Floating Feet, was posted on October 31st, 2017. That was a beginning, albeit a bit shaky. It was a pretty good start. It's been a wild ride ever since, with all the attendant ups and downs. To every one of you who have listened to the show over the years, whether you've been with us from the beginning, have just found the show, or drop in from time to time, thank you so much, and happy Halloween. We have chatted about the roots of Halloween in some of our previous special episodes about the celebration. Just a refresher, this is the time of year during which Celtic pagans held the fire festival of Samhain. They believed that the barriers between the physical world and the afterlife are at their thinnest at this time, allowing for more interaction between the living and the dead. If you're willing to look, you'll see that human culture and all other endeavors are shot through with one predominant and frightening idea, that one day, everything, including you and me, dear listeners, must come to an end. One day, we will die. You are listening to Dark Poutine episode 192, Halloween 2021, Death, the Afterlife, and Things in Between. Human beings are, as far as we know, the only animal capable of understanding that inevitably every one of us, good eggs and bad apples alike, will die. We will all, hopefully a long time from now, pass away, be sleeping with the fishes, or if you like, have met our maker. There are so many ways to say someone or something is dead. Some of the most creative I can recall come from Monty Python's parrot sketch. Mr. Praline, played by John Cleese, explains to a contrarian shop owner that the parrot he'd recently bought is dead. The shop owner says that the Norwegian blue, not an actual type of parrot, not dead in its cage, but simply pining for the fjords. Mr. Praline screams, "He's not pining, he's passed on. This parrot is no more. He's ceased to be. He's expired and gone to meet his maker. He's a stiff, bereft of life. He rests in peace. If you hadn't nailed him to the perch, he'd be pushing up the daisies. His metabolic processes are now history. He's off the twig. He's kicked the bucket. He's shuffled off this mortal coil. Run down the curtain and join the bleeding choir invisible. This is an ex-parrot." Russian-American novelist and poet Vladimir Nabokov wrote about it in Speak Memory, a memoir. He said, "The cradle rocks above an abyss, and common sense tells us that our existence is but a brief crack of light between two eternities of darkness." End quote. In his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, philosopher William James said, "Back of everything is the great specter of universal death, the all-encompassing blackness." James called this idea the worm at the core, a bit of rot in an otherwise amazing apple. This idea of our eventual death is inescapable. While he was a professor at Simon Fraser University here in Vancouver, American cultural anthropologist and author Ernest Becker wrote his 1974 Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death. In the book, Becker discusses the psychological and philosophical implications of how people and cultures have reacted to the concept of death. He also posits that human civilization is ultimately an elaborate, symbolic defense mechanism against the knowledge of our mortality, which in turn acts as the emotional and intellectual response to our basic survival mechanism. Every single thing we do is informed by that dark bit of knowledge. Every interest we have, all the art we create, even having children to ensure our genes are carried forward, serves our own deepest desire to, as Dylan Thomas put it, rage against the dying of the light, to deny the grim reaper.
I've read that Becker book probably about 10 times. I know you've read it a few times as well.
Yep.
I think that's one of the reasons why we get along so well. We like a lot of the same books.
It's true.
It's fascinating, this whole idea of, he called them immortality projects.
Yeah.
Right? And his point was that it's not the death of the body that people fear, but the death of meaning, right? Because we all become sort of, as these quirky animals with brains, we've become symbols,
right?
Versus just animals that are living. What I find really fascinating, though, is he died just after the book was written, and he won a Pulitzer Prize posthumously for the book.
Right.
So with his book, The Denial of Death, he denied death.
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And I also like that there's the Canadian, actually Vancouver connection with him. That,
yeah, he died here.
Yeah, and he was writing that particular book thanks to experiences he was having at Burnaby General Hospital.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
American author and activist James Baldwin seemed to believe that our fear of death is what causes all of the ills of humanity. In The Fire Next Time, Baldwin wrote, "Perhaps the whole root of our trouble, the human trouble, is that we will sacrifice all the beauty of our lives, will imprison ourselves in totems, taboos, crosses, blood sacrifices, steeples, mosques, races, armies, flags, nations, in order to deny the fact of death."
Have you read much James Baldwin?
No, but I've watched a couple of documentaries about him. I've read a little bit of his stuff, and I find him so compelling.
He's amazing. My favorite quote from him was, it's about racism.
Yeah.
He said, I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they'll be forced to deal with pain.
Right.
It gets me every time.
He was a fascinating man, a contemporary of Malcolm X.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was a friend of Maya Angelou as well.
Although in Western society at least, today's children are typically more protected from the concept of death. Historically, though, children began to have an awareness of mortality quite early on. Perhaps thanks to more prominent war and disease, they were surrounded by it. Death was in their consciousness in their fairy tales, the Brothers Grimm, especially, and their original less sanitized tales, and other dark nursery rhymes. Take, for example, the Mother Goose nursery rhyme, Ring Around the Rosie. This rhyme arose from the Great Plague, an outbreak of bubonic and pneumonic plague that affected London in the year 1665. It goes, ring around the roses, a pocket full of posies. A tissue, we all fall down. According to blogs.loc.gov/folklore, author James Fitzgerald wrote, Ring Around the Roses is all about the Great Plague, the apparent whimsy being foil for one of London's most atavistic dreads, thanks to the Black Death. The fatalism of the rhyme is brutal. The roses are a euphemism for deadly rashes. The posies are supposed preventative measure. The tissues pertain to sneezing symptoms, and the implication of everyone falling down is, well, death. End quote. The elephant in the room for me, and I'm sure for many of you, is that we don't know what happens after death. As a child, the thought of death terrified me. It still does. I became both obsessed and terrified with death and things related to it. I devoured stories about ancient Egypt during the day, and then at night I was terrorized by slow-moving mummies lumbering toward me, powerless to escape their relentless pursuit. My fear of death has informed my interest in the afterlife, the occult, horror, and of course, true crime. We all have questions about death and dying, chief of which to many is, does dying hurt? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, author of what has been called the definitive book on the subject, on death and dying, said, no, death doesn't hurt. She wrote, death is not painful. It is the most beautiful experience you will have, end quote. Well, that's a nice sentiment, but I suspect in some cases it does hurt a lot, or at least the process leading up to it does. Another question is, do you know that you're dying when it's happening? According to medicine.net, quote, a conscious dying person can know if they are on the verge of dying. Some feel immense pain for hours before dying, while others die in seconds. This awareness of approaching death is most pronounced in people with terminal conditions such as cancer. A person who is approaching death in the next few minutes or seconds will gasp for breath out of air hunger and have noisy secretions while breathing. It's hard to tell what a dying person experiences when they die because that secret goes with them. Even doctors accept the fact that it is difficult to predict when the person is entering the last days or weeks of their life. But what about the people who are survivors of a near-death situation and have experienced what it feels like when they are about to die? A survey was carried out to find out the same. Researchers asked 140 survivors of cardiac arrest, cessation of heartbeat and breathing, from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Austria about their near-death experiences. Here's what they found. In total, 39% of survivors reported feeling some kind of awareness while being resuscitated. They felt a peaceful feeling with a sensation that time had slowed down or sped up. A total of 13% said they felt that they were getting separated from their bodies. Only 2% said that they were fully aware of what was going on during the resuscitation procedure. I've had my own experiences with death. Most of us have. All of us have had a friend or relative die. Some of us have been to the viewing of a body or open casket funeral. Both traditionally are geared toward giving closure to loved ones after the passing of a family member. I went with my mom to view my nanny's body at Sweeney's Funeral Home in Bridgewater just after her passing in the summer of 2000. It was clear to me that what I was looking at had been my grandmother at one time, but what made her Vera Hall was obviously no longer there. I'm glad I went, but I can't say it's for everyone. Although it helped me to realize Nanny was gone, it also reminded me of that eternal question. What happens to us after we die? I'm not talking about scientifically, about our body that eventually decomposes. That's very well known. But my question is about our consciousness, a person's isness, that spark of life that watches our lives from beginning to end, also known as a soul in some religions. Does that thing that makes us ourselves go somewhere? If it does, where is that? How does it get there? Is there some kind of life after death? These are questions still unanswered that have been asked as long as humanity has been aware of its own mortality. Some say that when we're dead, we're dead. There's nothing else. We're just gone. But not everyone can accept that, and it doesn't feel right to me somehow. I'm not alone there. To better wrap our heads around death and what happens directly afterward, many cultures have developed personifications of death, or psychopomps. Psychopomps, from the Greek word meaning the guide of souls, are creatures, spirits, angels, or deities in many religions whose responsibility is to escort newly deceased souls from the earth to the afterlife. Here in the West, the specter of death takes the form of a robed, hooded skeleton carrying a scythe, the Grim Reaper, here to harvest our souls and bring us to the world beyond this one. The Reaper finds its roots in Greek mythology. There he was called Thanatos. From Britannica.com. Thanatos was the son of Nyx, the goddess of night, and the brother of Hypnos, the god of sleep. He appeared to humans to carry them off to the underworld when the time allotted to them by the fates had expired. Thanatos was once defeated by the warrior Heracles, who wrestled him to save the life of Alcestis, the wife of Admetus, and he was tricked by Sisyphus, the king of Corinth, who wanted a second chance at life. There are many other representations of death in different ideologies. As part of their creation mythology, Japanese tradition has Izanami. Wikipedia simplifies the story of Izanami, also known as Yomotsu Okami, goddess of the dead. Quote, the Kojiki relates that the Japanese goddess Izanami was burnt to death giving birth to the fire god Hinokagutsuchi. She then entered a realm of perpetual night called Yomi no Kuni. Her husband, Izanagi, pursued her there, but discovered his wife was no longer as beautiful as before. After an argument, she promised she would take 1,000 lives every day, becoming a goddess of death. There are also death gods called Shinigami, which are closer to the Western tradition of the Grim Reaper, while commonly in modern Japanese arts and fiction, were essentially absent in traditional mythology. In Celtic tradition, the Irish have the Banshee. From CelticWeddingRings.com, quote, a banshee is said to be a fairy in Irish legend, and her scream is believed to be an omen of death. The scream is also called cawin, which means keening, and is a warning that there will be an imminent death in the family, and as the Irish families blended over time, it is said that each family has its own banshee. A banshee is a disembodied spirit that can appear in any of the following forms: a beautiful young woman wearing a shroud, a pale woman in a white dress with long red hair, a woman with long silver dress and silver hair, a headless woman carrying a bowl of blood and is naked from the waist up, an old woman with frightening red eyes, a green dress and long white hair, or an old woman with a veil covering her face, dressed all in black with long gray hair. Well, they seem to have covered all their bases there. There are other fascinating and terrifying examples of psychopomps sent to guide the recently deceased through our transition to the afterlife once we've kicked the bucket. Mut was the personification and messenger of death in the Native American Cahuilla people of Southern California and northern Mexico, and was usually depicted as an owl or as the unseen hooting of owls. The deity Yama in both Buddhism and Hinduism is described as having 4 arms, protruding fangs, and complexion of storm clouds with a wrathful expression, surrounded by a garland of flames, dressed in red, yellow, or blue garments, riding a water buffalo and holding a sword, noose, and a mace to capture dead souls. As well as Thanatos, the Greeks also had the ferryman Charon. Charon carried souls of the newly deceased who had received the rites of burial across the river Styx that divided the world of the living from the world of the dead. A coin to pay Charon for the passage was sometimes placed in or on the mouth of a dead person to pay the ferryman. Some authors say that those who could not pay the fee, or those whose bodies were left unburied, had to wander the shores for 100 years until they were allowed to cross the river. Singer and storyteller Chris de Burgh reminds us in his song Don't Pay the Ferryman not to give the fee until he gets us to the other side. Perhaps my favorite psychopomp, if you can have one of those, comes from ancient Egyptian tradition, of course. The jackal-headed deity Anubis, the son of Osiris and Nephthys. According to the Egyptian Book of the Dead as laid out in the ancient papyrus of Ani, Anubis oversaw the process of mummification, and it was up to him to judge the worthiness of a person after their death. If judged to be worthy, Anubis guided the recently deceased into the underworld, also known as the Duat, which had only one entrance that could be reached by traveling through the tomb of the deceased. From the academic paper titled The Book of Death Weighing Your Heart by Francesco Corelli, quote, "To the traditions, the heart, or ib, rather than the brain, was the source of human wisdom and the center of emotions and memory. Because of its apparent links with intellect, personality, and memory, it was considered the most important of the internal organs. It could reveal the person's true character even after death, so the belief went, and therefore, the heart was left in the deceased body during mummification. After burial, Anubis then placed the heart of the dead person on one side of a scale, weighing it against a feather, representing Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice, on the other side. The ibis-headed god Thoth, the scribe of Osiris, would record the results on his papyrus. If the scales balanced, it was off to the underworld. If the heart weighed more than the feather of Ma'at, Anubis tossed it to the monster Amit, who was waiting nearby. Amit, or the devourer of the dead, waited patiently near the scales at every weighing. He was depicted as a fearsome creature representing people-eating creatures from the region, with the forequarters of a lion, the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, and the head of a crocodile. I remember when I first learned of this story. It was in a Golden Key Twilight Zone comic book of all places. I think I was mildly traumatized by it. And we'll take a break right here. I think I need one. And we're back. Any comments so far on this death-filled episode, Matthew?
It's a big subject.
It is. It's huge. What I realized, and I've mentioned it here in the script, is that I could have done an entire podcast endlessly about this particular topic because I have such an interest in it.
Yeah. I mean, when I was younger, I had a fear of death, but I've trained my mind out of it.
Yeah.
I think Alan Watts, do you know who Alan Watts is?
I absolutely know who
So I've
Alan
read a
Watts.
lot of him. And,
Yeah.
and he said, think about going to sleep and never waking up. He says, children, think about it. He said, now think about waking up, having never gone to sleep. And that's when you were born.
Right.
So the experience is the same. So there's nothing to fear because you don't remember anything.
Yeah.
You know, what I've learned is I'm Matthew, right?
Yep.
I'm sort of the I, the me, this sort of individual, but at the same time, I'm eternal. Before you're born, you're there, just in different form.
Yeah.
So I just think of it as a continual process. I'm sort of the universe experiencing itself.
Yep.
And if you can live sort of straddling that way of thinking, death isn't so scary.
Through my research, it seems as though there are as many concepts of afterlife as there have been people to ponder what it might be like. Some believe we simply just come back, reincarnated into the next available body at the moment of conception. Wiccans, for example, believe the recently departed go to a place called the Summerland. Here souls rest, recuperate from life, and reflect on the experiences they had during their lives. After a period of rest, the souls are reincarnated and the memory of their previous lives is erased. Some believe strongly that how you've lived determines where you wind up. There's the glory of heaven for good eggs or eternal torment of hell for the bad apples. I'd rather not step on anyone's spiritual toes, so we'll leave that where it lies. According to encyclopedia.com, in some cases, quote, the world of the dead is situated on earth, but at a lesser or greater distance away from the dwellings of the living. The Trobriand Islanders, New Guinea, situate the village of the dead in the direct neighborhood of their own villages. The Celtic Ternanog is an island in the far west of the other side of the immense ocean. According to the Tasmanians in Australia, the dead travel to an island nearby where they continue their existence. In parts of the Northern Territory, Australia, the island of the dead is situated far off in the direction of the morning star. According to the Iwe, Togo, the country of the dead lies a long way off from that of the living on the far side of a river, and the journey to arrive there is difficult and dangerous. End quote. Some cultures believe there's another, more abstract and unseen dimension that our souls travel to after the lights go out. In Norse mythology, the place is called Valhalla, meaning Hall of the Slain. It is a majestic, enormous hall located in Asgard, ruled over by the god Odin. Chosen by Odin, half of those who die in combat travel to Valhalla upon death, led by Valkyries, while the other half go to the goddess Freya's field, Folkvanger. In Valhalla, the dead warriors join the masses of people who have died in combat and various legendary Germanic heroes and kings as they prepare to aid Odin during the events of Ragnarok. If you recognize some of these place names only from Avengers movies, I implore you to read more mythology. The teachings of the Baha'i faith state that the nature of the afterlife is beyond the understanding of those of the living. Just as an unborn fetus cannot understand the nature of the world outside the womb. The Baha'i writings state that the soul is immortal, and after death it will continue to progress until it finally attains God's presence. In Baha'i belief, souls in the afterlife will continue to retain their individuality and consciousness and will be able to recognize and communicate spiritually with other souls whom they have made deep, profound friendships with, such as their spouses. There are scientific studies into the existence of the afterlife. The most well-known are those of near-death experiences. From Sarah Bartlett's Afterlife Bible, she writes that, quote, most subjects report having NDEs during major surgery or during traumatic events such as car accidents or heart attacks. People who have claimed to have had one most commonly talk of the feeling they experienced during the NDE as still having a body, but of a different nature to the one they left behind. They glimpse the spirits of relatives and friends who have already died. They may approach some sort of barrier or border representing the limit between earthly life and the spirit world. They are usually overwhelmed by intense feelings of joy, love, and peace. Despite this attitude, they reunite with their physical body and continue to live. End quote. Bartlett goes on to write, quote, since the success of the 1970s book Life After Life by Raymond Moody, publications and the media have been overwhelmed with reports of the afterlife or near-death experiences. This is not just a new fashion for sensationalizing an experience, even though Moody's book did a lot to revive the idea in popular consciousness. It just so happens that our ability to communicate to the media and the world is a little easier than it was even 50 years ago. There have been reports as far back as the 4th century BCE when Plato recounted the story of the myth of a soldier who died on the battlefield and came back to life to recount his experiences. A tale told to the 1st century CE historian Plutarch reveals how a certain man of ill repute fell from a precipice to his death only to revive 3 days later at his funeral. End quote. There are the poo-pooers who claim that what people experience in return from is simply a hallucination of a dying brain projected by an overload of serotonin triggered by a lack of oxygen. There's still a lot of research going on. The jury seems to be out on this one. To help me with some of my questions about these things, I thought it would be the perfect time to have yet another chat with longtime friend of the show, paranormal researcher Morgan Knudsen. Here's the audio of a recent chat that we had. So let's talk about what we're really here to talk about, which is the afterlife. Oh my gosh.
Something I've never talked about before.
I'm pretty sure that you know a lot more about this than I do, which is why I brought you on. Is there any science that comes close to proving that there's life after death?
Yeah, actually there has been, and I think a lot more than what people are willing to talk about really in the mainstream. You know, a lot of this research from universities like Princeton and Oxford and Northampton and places like that have really gone under the radar of public attention, which is so strange because it really is the leading edge of science in these arenas like neuroscience and stuff like that. One place that I think has done just research above and beyond has been the Windbridge Research Institute. And they've been addressing testing of mediums. And I think when we're talking about sort of proof of life after death, because we still don't know for sure what happens after we die, but we can look at certain aspects of research and the paranormal and things like that. And I think mediumship is probably one of those places where we can start to look. So, for example, the Windbridge Research Center, they basically have the gold standard of testing for psychic or psi phenomenon, and they test in a few ways. They're looking at ruling out fraud, cueing, rater bias, cold reading, and things like that. And the protocol that they've developed has actually been produced or has produced peer-reviewed results and has been published over the years. So they've been looking at something called anomalous information reception, which is it's short for AIR, and it can be determined in a number of ways, but they're looking for information that can't be determined through obvious means. So they've come out with some incredible studies. Another great example is the American Statistical Association. The president there, Jessica Utz, she determined that psi and psychic functioning actually meets the criteria as well as established and basically compared it to tests for things like different medications that we would know, like Advil and things like that, and realized that the scrutiny under which psi goes under and the testing that it goes under is way and over and above things that we take for granted, like basic medication, which we assume works. Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting. The American Psychological Association, a fellow by the name of Dr. Etzel Cardenia from Lund University, he confirmed as well that there is cumulative support for psi. So I think the debate on whether or not it's scientifically proven is moot at this point. It's just a matter of figuring out what exactly it is.
Well, that sort of leads me to my next question. Are these things, these entities, ghosts, are they really the souls of departed people, or is there something else that's happening here?
And that's such a great question. And I think that's what the field in and of itself is really looking at right now. And the answers that they're coming to are very widespread. So in this research, we look at something called somatic versus survival psi. So survival psi is that people like mediums or channelers are getting the information from a departed soul, somebody who no longer has a physical body, and that's survival psi. In somatic psi, it's a little bit different. They use information that is already in the environment to pull information from the environment itself. So things like precognition, psychokinesis, all sorts of things that fall into that category. Telepathy, for instance, they're looking at as maybe this is something that they're actually getting from or pulling from the environment, and we're projecting it in some way. So there's a couple of different angles, I think, to the question and the research that they're looking at right now.
If there is something out there, are we able to communicate with it in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a prominent question, and I think a question that we've asked for centuries. And, there's been some progress in that arena as well, from places like the Institute of Noetic Science, places like, Princeton University, who's been doing a lot of studies. Yale has just opened a program as well, and a number of others. And, what they're finding is that people who seem to be able to receive or communicate with non-physical in some way are able to let go. Oftentimes practice meditation. They're able to get into a relaxed state. They're typically, personality-wise, they're a little bit more open. They pursue and they go into the world with open heart, open mind. They tend to be a bit more extroverted. So there's even characteristics within different people that seem to attract or promote this ability and phenomenon. But there was recently a book that was just recently published called The Science of Channeling. And they really began to look at what is it? Can this be done? And, by the end of their studies and by the end of, the conclusions that they've drawn, the answer is, yeah, they're pulling information, and we have the ability to pull information from someone or something that is not physically present.
But what about the amateur, somebody who wants to give it a try themselves? Is there specific steps or a method that you can recommend for people who want to at least try? I know we have like Ouija boards and maybe tarot and things like that.
Yeah.
But are there other things that are a little more scientific in their approach?
You know, it's funny because even when you get into the experiments that have been done over the years, whether it be through, trying to create some sort of mechanism that talks to the dead or, whatever method that they have cooked up to use, it always comes back, even in the labs, to things like meditation and the ability to let your emotions raise to a more joyful state, a peaceful state. And that's when people typically experience things coming through and messages and all sorts of stuff like that. But it's really about getting into that allowing state. And it sounds so simple because, here everybody's saying, well, what do you mean like meditation? And all of a sudden I'm going to be talking to dead people and that's crazy. But the reality is how many people actually make time in their day to make their mind peaceful? Not very many. And, we live in a society where everything is prized on busyness and craziness and coming up with this next idea. But the reality is probably one of the methods in engaging in non-physical is to be still.
That makes sense to me. And then perhaps adding something else, like asking via a spirit board or something like that, after you're in the right space.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's funny because people think about Ouija boards and stuff like that, and they think, oh, it's an evil process, and I've had horrible results. And we got to start to look at the energy that you're bringing to the table, like exactly like what you just said. When you bring an energy to the table that is fearful or worried or angry or anything like that, hands down, you're going to be able to get that back out of your experience with the paranormal. Like that's totally what you're going to get back. And most people, when they're about to pick up something like a Ouija board or do some kind of seance, they're spooked, they're frightened, or they're in grief. I get a lot of people that'll ask me, I just lost so-and-so and I really, really want to talk to this person. That's the wrong time to be engaging in this stuff. You've got to get yourself to that positive space and meet them where they are, which is pure positive energy.
I talked about NDEs, near-death experiences, a little bit as evidence of something other than this realm that we know. What about out-of-body experiences, OBEs? Are they sort of more proof or that consciousness exists apart from or outside of the body, or can?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because out-of-body experiences are these paranormal experiences that are so close to the near-death experience, but we get to talk to people a little bit more commonly afterwards, where people that, have passed away or whichever, we just have to hope that we get a hold of them later. Right. But with OBEs, it's different. And the Monroe Institute is such a great example of an organization that has gone above and beyond to study this. And it got to the point with them where they were actually for a while working with the CIA, teaching these agents and the military and things like that on how to project themselves and have this out-of-body experience. So I think the major question that comes up around OBEs and life after death is what they call the hard problem in parapsychology. Is consciousness fundamental or emergent? If it's emergent, then that means that we need our brain to function. We need our physical brain to function. If it's fundamental, then we are translating that consciousness, and our consciousness can move around outside of ourselves, which is what the Monroe Institute has really discovered over the years of their work. So, I think OBEs are really crucial to understanding some of this stuff and can be done in a controlled setting, which I think is even more important.
There are a lot of books and even YouTube videos about how to have an OBE. It's really fascinating. And I feel like some of our listeners might have even had experiences like this, because I've talked to many people who feel like they've had an OBE at some time in their lifetime.
Yeah, definitely. And what's so cool about this is that when you really get into deep meditation, which is oftentimes how these out-of-body experiences start, then you can start to experience the feeling of the beginnings of what people report of being out of body experience. So there's, like you say, there's places that you can go to learn to do this. The Monroe Institute being one of them.
I have written here, let's talk about the undead, ghosts, vampires, and zombies, oh my. And I don't even know why I wrote that, but at the same time, I kind of want to address that stuff, because if you look at a zombie is supposedly a reanimated human corpse with no consciousness per se, just this drive to eat other humans, eat their flesh or brains. It depends on which movie you're watching. How do you think culture developed these ideas of ghosts, vampires, and zombies? Do they come from our curiosity about the afterlife?
It depends on where you fall in and what culture you're looking at, because all of these different creatures are found in various cultures, and they usually have different stories behind them, but they all sort of lean in the same direction. So, for example, like zombies, we look at the Haitian culture and the roots in Africa, West Africa, and things like that. But even the zombie phenomenon was really perpetuated during the slavery times, because the slave drivers, which were often people who were slaves themselves, would turn around and threaten zombification of the people around them and the slaves that they were dealing with. They would just say, they were voodoo priests or whatnot themselves, and they would say, if you don't work the way we want you to work, you're gonna die and you're gonna turn into a zombie. So there was a whole bunch of different cultural aspects to whether you're dealing with zombies, vampires, all of that kind of thing.
Vampires are a whole kind of different thing. Like, if you look, there are people who call themselves vampires and say that they're practicing vampires. I wouldn't say that they are consider themselves immortal, that they're going to live forever, and they're probably able to walk around in the sunshine and go to work and those kind of things. But they have a vampire culture, which is kind of interesting. But it all seems to be back to that same idea that within each and every one of us, we have this idea. We know one day, no matter who we are, good, bad, or indifferent, we are going to kick the bucket.
Yeah. And we look back, especially the vampire culture, it has changed so drastically. Where zombies and whatnot have kind of remained the same. Where with vampires, you look at the original descriptions of vampires and they're disgusting.
Yeah.
They're nothing like the suave, club going vampires that sparkle that we see now.
Right.
They're the bloated, gross, awful looking, awful smelling creatures that, you drove a stake through their heart because they were bloated and had been feeding on blood. They're terrible. So, vampires are interesting to me specifically because they've done such a cultural turnaround.
Real quick, let's talk about Supernatural Circumstances, because people are going to be able to hear that podcast today as well. So supernaturalcircumstances.com. You can get it on any podcatcher, and it's the new podcast that Morgan and myself are doing on supernatural circumstances. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
It's so exciting. I'm so excited about this. I'm so excited to be able to share this stuff with people because, there's a plethora of these podcasts out there, these paranormal type discussions out there. And, I think what I'm so loving about what we've created here is that it's a mixed bag of information, all angled towards new facts, critical thinking, and your people's own journey. No matter what you're looking for out of the podcast, you will walk away with something that you can use.
Yeah, for sure. So check out Supernatural Circumstances today on Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much, Morgan Knudsen. Some of my own brushes with death have been a bit scary and not at all typical. I've mentioned in a few episodes my time as a gravedigger and work as a security officer at various hospitals here in the lower mainland of BC. I haven't elaborated much, but listeners have repeatedly asked me to talk about my experiences. I can't think of a better time to share them than during a spooky Halloween special, death-themed episode. One of the occasions that I saw a dead person was while I was working at the cemetery as a gravedigger. Truthfully, working at a graveyard, you spend more time landscaping than you do digging graves. Many can work their entire career at a cemetery without actually seeing a body. There are a few caskets and some urns, but almost never do you get to see an actual human body. I am not one of those many. Why? Because I have participated in an exhumation. Exhumations take place pretty much for one of three reasons. One reason that all true crime aficionados are aware of is that a murder inquiry takes place after a burial and investigators require a closer look at the body, so they need to exhume it for forensic purposes. The second reason is that the family requests that the body is moved. It's not common, but it happens. I'm not sure of the veracity of this story, but it's an interesting one. The veteran cemetery employees that I worked with told me that the year before I started work at Brookside, a man who was moving away from the region wanted to take his deceased wife with him, transporting the coffin in a truck to rebury her closer to his new home in another province. I was told that during the exhumation, one of the canvas straps used when raising the casket broke, allowing the casket to fall hard on its side and onto the grass. It apparently popped open and its occupant rolled out, after which there was an argument as to which of the employees would be the one to put the corpse back into the box. The third and rarest reason for exhumation is the one that precipitated the uncovering that I was involved in. It is that someone made a mistake. A previous superintendent of the cemetery, who was known for his love of a stiff drink, had made a boo-boo. The story was that somehow a man we will now refer to as Mr. Smith was buried in the wrong spot beside someone else's wife. It was the deceased woman's family who made the discovery and demanded that the situation be rectified. This might have been the event that had me tasked as a trained draftsman to remapping the entire cemetery with survey instruments to ensure it wasn't repeated. So, one rainy morning, a crew of rain-suit-clad cemetery workers, me included, and a local undertaker were tasked with exhuming and moving Mr. Smith, who'd been there around 9 months. Using shovels after a small backhoe did most of the heavy lifting dirt-wise, carefully, we uncovered Mr. Smith's pine rough box, a liner of sorts, used to house a casket in the wet Nova Scotian earth. The lid of the pine box was removed to give access to the casket so the straps could be affixed prior to the backhoes lifting it out of the grave. And that's when the smell hit. Like they say in all those cop shows, it's an odor that once you've experienced it, you'll never forget. One of my co-workers vomited behind a nearby gravestone. The smell was so strong. The straps were put in place and the casket was lifted out. As it came up, bits of the bottom of the wooden coffin bowed outward. Thankfully, the liner of the coffin prevented a disaster that would have included Mr. Smith falling back into the hole. However, in what was a darkly comedic moment, I was taken by the sight of the shape of Mr. Smith's bum protruding through the bottom of the damaged box. The casket was gingerly lowered onto the grass, and to check that there had been no damage to Mr. Smith, the funeral director present opened the casket lid for a peek inside. The smell got stronger, but the sight was not that bad. There in the casket, dressed in his Sunday best, was the well-preserved body of old Mr. Smith, in eternal repose. Modern embalming had done its job. The only defect evident were spots of what looked like cotton balls on his face. I was told by the funeral director that it was a type of post-mortem mold that commonly forms on a body as it decomposes. Mr. Smith was moved and carefully reburied, in the right spot. I'd actually pretty much forgotten about another particular experience of seeing a corpse. It was not a good experience, and I must have put it away somewhere safe. I didn't recall it until, while taking a break from researching this episode, I was watching a movie that involved a suicide, and it all came flooding back to me. In March of 1993, I was training to become a contract orderly, tasked to sit with palliative patients at Halifax hospitals. One day, while in class, I was pulled out to answer the phone. It was my live-in girlfriend, and she was very upset. She was so distraught that pretty much all she could say was, "He's dead, and you have to come home." I tried to ask what was going on, but she was too upset to tell me. I was in Dartmouth at the time, so I had to transit back to the apartment on South Park Street near St. Mary's University, where I was a student at the time. It took around 50 minutes. When I walked into our third-floor apartment, it was in darkness. The drapes were drawn, and there were no lights on. My girlfriend was sitting as far away from the window as she could, and she'd been crying. I asked again what had happened, and she said, "Someone jumped," and pointed to the window saying, "I heard it, and he's right out there." I looked out the window and saw a couple of EMTs, the building's maintenance man, and 2 police officers standing over the body of a man on the roof of the carport directly below our suite. The man was lying on his back. He was not moving. I watched horrified as the man was lifted off the roof and put into a black body bag and carried away. The catastrophic damage to his head was what I recall best. I still see the moment he was lifted up and into that bag like a screenshot burned into my mind's eye. I didn't know the man in life, but I heard later from another resident in the building that he had gone backwards out the window of his apartment on the 9th floor on purpose. I was also later told that the complex had a reputation. Some called it Suicide Towers, as there had been other previous people who chose to die by suicide in similar ways at that address. Years later, while attending film school, now living with Carol in North Vancouver, I got a job as a security guard. One of my postings was at Vancouver Hospital. It was a grueling job, and I typically walked at least 12 kilometers a night, as we had to walk routes through the complex twice, once before lunch and once after. I was shown around the hospital on my first day by the site supervisor, who took me to the crypt in the morgue to try and freak me out. The crypt in VGH is more or less just a giant refrigerator packed full with bodies on gurneys awaiting processing, and others on steel shelves in some stage of transition, often awaiting pickup by a funeral home. There was also the wall of stainless steel sliding drawers you see in most crime or horror films. You've seen it in the X-Files. I was more fascinated than afraid, although there's always that feeling of recognition and relation that comes with seeing a body. It says, "Oh my goodness, that's a dead human being there, just like me." The big thing that happened at VGH to me was seeing something that not everybody does. I witnessed a coworker's death. One night, at the beginning of my shift, I was introduced to a man I'll call Jim Johnson. Jim was a guy about my height with a round red face and curly strawberry blonde hair. The site supervisor on duty that night took Jim with him to train him on the routes that we walked, just as I'd been shown months earlier. In the wee hours of the morning, a fire alarm sounded on the 6th floor of what was then called the Centennial Pavilion. The expected protocol for security's response to a firearm, regardless of where we were on the campus, was for all guards to run to the site of the alarm. When I received word on my walkie-talkie of the alarm, I was a block away at the BC Cancer Agency on my rounds. I ran to the building and up 6 flights of stairs to the 6th floor. The reason I had to take the stairs is that during an alarm, the elevators automatically ground themselves to await firefighters. All the other guards had to do the same, including Jim and the site supervisor. They were already on site when I arrived. Jim looked terrible. He was ashen and pouring sweat. I mumbled to the site supervisor that Jim did not look well, but I don't recall a response. Once we checked the floor and determined that it had been a false alarm, the other guards were sent back to their routes, and the site supervisor asked me to meet he and Jim on the 4th floor to shut off the alarm. The site sup wanted to show me where the alarm panel was. The 4th floor was an interstitial, mechanical floor for the building, accessible only to security, maintenance staff, and records management employees who had a file storage room there on that floor. When I stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor, the site supervisor called me over the radio to assist him in the alarm room. He said that he and Jim were already there, but he needed help. When I entered, there was Jim on the floor, gasping for air and turning purple. The site supervisor was performing CPR. Moments later, Jim's bladder let go and I saw him die. despite the efforts of EMTs and a cardiac team from the hospital, Jim died right there due to a massive coronary event. When Jim died, I saw something leave him. I can't explain it, but something clearly perceptible happened. Perhaps it was his eyes, I don't know. According to Wikipedia, quote, a study conducted in 1901 by physician Duncan McDougall sought to measure the weight lost by a human when the soul departed the body upon death. McDougall weighed dying patients in an attempt to prove that the soul was material, tangible, and thus measurable. Although McDougall's results varied considerably from 21 grams, for some people this figure has become synonymous with the measure of a soul's mass. His results have never been reproduced and are generally regarded as either meaningless or considered to have had little, if any, scientific merit, end quote. So perhaps there's no weight to our consciousness, but I know what I saw. One moment Jim was there and the next he was not. The moment of death was very evident to me and it hit me hard. I suffered post-traumatic stress symptoms for some time, including nightmares, bouts of anger, and fear of returning to work at the hospital. I became obsessed with dying at 43, just like Jim was. His wife, who I'd met the day he died, told me that Jim should have never been at that type of work. He was due for a triple bypass operation and had taken the job in security because they were having trouble making ends meet. Jim thought that he'd be sitting on his rump most of the time. He would have at some other site. That was not the case with this one, though. Although I didn't have cardiac issues, as my 43rd birthday approached, my anxiety increased. And for my entire 44th year, I was convinced that that was the year I was going to torque it in. I didn't, but jeepers, that sucked. So how has death touched you, Matthew? What are your experiences with it? Only if you're comfortable talking about it.
It's on my shoulder right now.
No.
Okay, so I'll talk about this a bit. When I was 16 years old, I had 10 grandparents.
Wow.
So,
because step-grandparents. And
all of my grandparents and all of my great-grandparents.
Oh, wow.
So from the age of 16 until eventually they're gone, I experienced all of their funerals. So that's 10 people. I think, my father actually died just a few months before I met Justin, my husband. He died quite young. He was about 56 years old. And I can remember when I visited my father's grave a few years back, being from a small town, I sort of recognized a few names. So I walked through the graveyard and counted.
Yeah.
And in that one graveyard, counted 40 people that I could remember.
Wow.
That I knew. Like sometimes, some of them were like my great-grandparents' friends when I was a kid. But just in that one graveyard at the time, it was 40 people that I'd known. And, so that was quite fascinating because when you're from a small town, and everyone's in the same, well, there's a few graveyards. There's like the Protestant one, the Catholic one, and the Dutch Reform one, right?
Right, yeah.
Justin jokingly calls me the angel of death because it's kind of dark that he calls me that. But, since I've met Justin, we've been together for 17 years. I've known essentially 17 people in those 17 years that have died.
Wow.
And most of them were under 40.
Wow.
2 brain tumors, heart attacks, 4 suicides, 8 overdoses, and 2 killed together in one motorcycle accident. So, and the youngest was 18, the oldest was 60, but most of them were under 40. So, there's been a lot of death in my life. And when that happens, when you go to that many funerals, it forces you to accept death as a part of life.
If you don't mind me asking, which one, other than family, hit you the hardest?
Keith and Anna. I'd introduced them, and they were in a motorcycle accident and died, and they were buried on the first anniversary of their wedding.
Oh, wow.
And I also had a friend's son who was named after me who committed suicide at 18, which is hard. And a lot of overdoses. My friend Corey here, did you ever meet Corey?
I don't think so.
When I first moved to Vancouver, he and I started hanging out. He's my first friend in Vancouver. I've only been here for 6 years.
Yeah.
And he died of an overdose.
Oh, wow.
A couple of years after I met him. So they're all hard in a way, right?
I think the hardest one for me, that wasn't family, and wasn't the man who died in front of me, was my friend Mike. And Mike and I, through high school, he was a few years older than me, so he was the guy who, I was like little Mike and he was big Mike.
Yeah.
You know, and we just went everywhere together. We hung out all the time, partied together. We even, like, Mike went out with a girl, or I went out with a girl, and then Mike went out with the same girl after we broke up, kind of thing. It was just like one of those kind of, we were just really close. And Mike, he struggled like myself. He struggled with alcohol addiction. And throughout the years, he tried to get sober, but couldn't. At one point, he was almost killed in a car accident going the wrong way on the 401.
Right.
Was hit by a semi, did not die. But he could never quite kick the habit. He never quite was able to sober up. And around 10 years ago, actually, he was found in an alleyway, non-responsive, in Barrie, Ontario, brain dead.
Wow.
And his mom, who I loved very much, she's also gone now, and his sister had to sit with him after pulling the plug on him.
Yeah.
And he died on Halloween, which is another sort of big anniversary on Halloween for me. Like, Halloween is an important time of year for me for some reason. I was adopted on Halloween. Dark Poutine has its anniversary on Halloween. Halloween is Halloween.
Yeah.
All Hallows Eve, and also is the time of year that I remember my friend Mike.
Yeah.
So it was very hard going back, like, and his mom had his ashes put into a little pool table shaped urn. There was like it was like a really specific.
Did you go back for the funeral?
We had a thing for him the next summer in Nova Scotia, and I saw people there who I hadn't seen in years, all mutual friends of his. And
that's
mine.
always hard. Like I've lived abroad for most of my adult life, and when I first moved, I found myself flying home for weddings, but eventually I was flying home for funerals.
Yeah.
And after my father died a number of years ago, a couple of years later, my mom met a guy named Gary.
Okay. Yeah.
And they started seeing each other,
Yep.
and he got ill. And most of the people that died sort of died more quickly, but Gary was sick.
Yeah.
So I had a chance to get home. And we went to the hospital to visit him. And it was the first time I knew I was saying goodbye to somebody who was about to go. And as I left the hospital room, I was a little bit freaked out and I was crying a bit. My brother was much more stoic, and he turned to me and he said, "Oh yeah, I forgot. That's right. You've never been home for the deaths."
Yeah.
And I think as soon as he said those words, because of the look on my face, like it just sort of struck me in the heart, the guilt of me realizing my brother sat by the bedsides of all these people. And as soon as it was out of his mouth, you could see him trying to put it back. He was like, "I didn't mean it that way." And I felt horrible.
Yeah.
And, it's, that was odd because it just made me realize my brother was there for all of them, and I never was.
So what about the afterlife? Do you believe there is one? Do you believe our energy goes somewhere and it is conscious in some way, or?
I'm kind of a non-dualist.
Yeah. Yep.
So I literally think we're part of the universe, and we always are. That the atoms in our bodies were forged in the hearts of dying stars.
Yes, totally.
We're literally the universe. So to me, it's just a part of a process.
Yeah.
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 So no, probably not conscious at all, but none of us know.
Right. Yeah.
But that's sort of my solace, the knowing that I am nothing to this universe, but I'm also all of it,
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up, Memento mori, folks. That's Latin for remember that you have to die. It doesn't have to be a scary thing, but remembering that helps me to recall that today is the only day that I need to be concerned about. I don't want to miss out on the rest of my life worrying about something that I have no control over. The fact is that life is terminal. Carpe diem. Seize the day. Do that project you've been putting off. Take that risk you've been waffling on. Do that podcast. Write that book. At some point in her career, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote, quote, When I die, I'm going to dance first in all the galaxies. I'm going to play and dance and sing. End quote. She died in 2004. I hope she's still dancing out there somewhere. Happy Halloween. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 192, Halloween 2021, Death, the Afterlife, and Things in Between. Let's get to some less spooky voicemails. That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week. Let's listen to our first voicemail. It looks like it comes to us from somebody in Cape Breton.
Hi there, my name is Melanie, and I'm calling from Cape Breton, originally from Port Colborne, Ontario, of all places. Just calling today in regards to today's episode. In 2008, I was 18 years old, and then the Greyhound bus incident happened. And that's where I began my journey of mental illness. I was constantly afraid of strangers, and I was always the type to smile and talk to everyone. And then after that, I felt very scared to do so. And throughout the years, it got to the point where I almost didn't even want to leave my house. So then I decided, okay, I can't live like this. So I decided to go to nursing school and focus on mental health. And during the mental health class, that whole topic came out, and it turns out that every single student in that class shared the same thoughts on it, that after that point, their lives had changed and they no longer had the same trust in people. So, I mean, it's a big part of our culture now. Everyone knows it, and I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing that people are aware that there could be someone suffering in public. And yeah, it's a big, difficult situation, and I mean, there's a lot that goes on with it, and my opinion or anyone else's opinion doesn't really matter on this subject, but it's really kind of become an eye-opener for a lot of people, and anyone out there who is still struggling and who does still feel feared, just make sure that you reach out and get some help, because not everyone is like, there's not every situation that you're going to be in that you're going to find that someone is out there to hurt you. Most times this is very, very rare circumstance. So just encouraging anyone who's suffering to go and find some help. And also, Mike, I wanted to tell you that I can't believe you're suggesting to drive from BC all the way to the East Coast again. That drive through Ontario is super, super painful. It just felt like it was never going to end. So if you do decide to do it, good luck. If there's anyone out there who's doing it right now, good luck, and make sure to get a lot of rest. Okay, my mandatory closing, have a bowel movement in your hat, sirs. Good day.
A bowel movement in our hats. Yeah, I thought she was going to go, like, I can't believe you're suggesting, like, and I'm thinking, oh no, what did I say?
It's like driving across the country, you're insane.
But yeah, I seriously thought I was about to catch shit from somebody. But no, yeah, I really do want to do it again. And she is right. Ontario seems endless.
Really?
Oh my gosh. Well, if you look at it on the map and look at the Trans-Canada Highway on the map.
You have to go up and over the lakes.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Ontario is about a third of the drive.
Yeah, and then you get into like the traffic in Ontario.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's unavoidable. Through Quebec is kind of bad, but I did most of Quebec and the eastern provinces at night, so it was super easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that's very cool. And it's cool that somebody in the nursing profession, mental health, gave us a call, because Isn't it interesting that a lot of people with mental health issues are attracted to psychiatric professions in some way?
Yeah.
I find that over and over again. People who have psychological struggles tend toward, let's get some education here. It's really kind of
sense.
Yeah, it does to me too. I mean, that's why I wanted to get into psychology. Because I'm a psycho.
Wow. You should have like a doctorate in something by now.
Right? I should have, I guess maybe a doctorate in sobriety. 29 years, it does count for something.
I'm a professional sober person.
Right. Oh, yeah, like that sober coach thing. That's a kind of a weird thing. I don't know how I feel about that, but anyway.
My friend who's a sober coach?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to our next voicemail. And this one appears as though it might be coming from who knows where, probably Ontario.
Hey guys, my name's Anita and I live in Niagara Falls, Ontario. I've been listening to the podcast for a lot of years. Took a short mental health break during the pandemic, just couldn't handle my true crime for a bit. And so now I'm back at it and kind of trying to get caught up. And I wanted to call because of episode, I think, 120, when you were talking about the daredevils that go over Niagara Falls. Growing up in Niagara Falls, I obviously worked in tourism for a lot of years as a teenager and in my 20s. And I just wanted to bring to light, after having listened to your podcast, I couldn't help but remember what it was like. I worked for the Niagara Parks Commission, which maintains the property down by the falls, and I got to know a lot of the Niagara Parks police. And the ones who were involved with the rescue and body retrieval of some of these daredevils or suicides that go over. In particular, I remember Steve Trotter, who I believe you mentioned in your podcast. He chose one of his sons for Father's Day weekend as a gift to his father and didn't really give a second thought to the fact that these men and women who needed to come down and rescue him were giving up their Father's Day weekend and a chance to be with their kids to go and save him. His whole plan relied on the fact that he would get saved quickly because he had a very limited air supply inside his barrel. So he needed to be pulled out. And he didn't really give a second thought to these poor guys risking their lives. It's not an easy thing getting down to that water. There's a lot of rocks. They have to rappel down the cliffside. So I think maybe it's just something that we tend not to think about. These daredevils sometimes get glorified and get a little bit of a hero status, and there's other people on the other end who have to take care of them after their little stunt. So I don't have a lot of love for them, but I do have a lot of love for you guys. I appreciate the podcast. I think you guys are amazing. I'm really, really enjoying the addition of Matthew, and keep it up. Guys, all I can say now is go shit in your hat. Have a good one.
Well, thank you so much. That's awesome. And what a great perspective to have after that episode. I don't know if you remember that one, Matthew, but it was a fun one to do. And some of the writing came from Pierre Burton's book and all that kind of stuff. My Canadian icon. I bow to Pierre Burton. Well, I don't know if I really do that. But anyway, thank you so much. Yeah, there are other people. When you're pulling off your stunt, they're on the North Shore Mountains or something like that, and you fall down, there are people who have to risk their lives to come get you. It's kind of
ridiculous.
Right?
I could hear her windscreen wipers going.
Yeah, I know.
It sounded like she was under the falls in her car.
It did. It sounded like she was either driving under Niagara Falls or there was a big rainstorm there in Ontario and she was driving on the 401 bored and thought, I'm going to call Mike and Matthew.
I vote that she was right under the falls.
Yeah. Yeah, we can always hope.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, she was able to call, so she doesn't sound like
she was in the Maid of the Mist, the boat, and that was the windscreen.
Yeah,
wipers.
There was no jeopardy there. Anyway, here is another voicemail, and this one seems to be coming from somewhere mysterious. I don't know where it is, but I have a feeling it might be from around Niagara Falls again.
Hey, Mike and Matthew, my second favorite M&Ms. Hope that you guys are having a terrific week. And I just wanted to say hello and how much that we enjoy your incredible podcast and bring up two quick things. The first, not everybody might know what hydro is. I am Canadian, and so I know that means your utility bill or your energy bill, your power bill. But for our American and international audience, there was an episode recently I was binging, and we said something about a guy coming around and reading the hydrometer. Well, hydro, it means water. That's because for a lot of Canadians, our power comes from Niagara Falls, which is hydroelectric power. So anytime that you hear a Canadian say hydro or the hydro bill or the hydrometer, what we mean is power, energy, the utilities. And the second one is I learned this today, the expression to cut someone off at the pass instead of cut someone off at the path. And I never knew that. So hope you guys are having a terrific day. And I think that the expression is to cut someone off at the pass. And I think that goes back to the Wild West. But I'm not quite sure. So I'm going to look that up. Hope you guys are having a fabulous one. And please, pretty please, go take a gigantic steaming shit in your hat. Bye for now.
I'm wondering if this person who called is a teacher of some description, because
I love these little things though.
Mm-hmm.
I love them, little tidbits. Yes, it's cut them off at the pass. Yes.
Yeah. I've never heard anybody say cut them off at the path.
Do you call it hydro out on the wrong side of the country? Where are you from?
On the wrong side of the country. No, we call it the electricity bill there.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay. Because
I was weirded out when I first heard I got to pay the hydro bill. And I'm like, why are you paying for water? I don't understand. But it's the water that generates the energy that you're paying for. Yeah. So
it's called hydro over here as well. Isn't
it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. BC Hydro is who somebody in your house probably pays a bill.
$50 a month.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Well, that's not too bad. I mean, you know,
we're pretty good with energy saving.
Well, that's good.
And the heat is sort of water heat.
Do you have Steve like on a little treadmill running?
Can you imagine?
To generate power?
Yeah, no. I would be not having any power if that was the case. They say bulldogs are lazy man dogs.
Yeah. Well, Steve is definitely a good egg, though.
He is.
You spent some time on the couch with him this weekend?
All day yesterday.
Oh, poor little guy. He must have missed you.
He did.
When you were away in Quebec. And that house, was that where you were staying?
Yeah.
In Quebec? What a nice place.
It's a manoir. It's lovely. And the owner, she's really nice. So I always like to stay there.
So like a bed and breakfast kind of thing?
Kind of, but they have like...
A la Francais.
They actually have like a really nice restaurant.
Oh, nice.
That's open one.
Oh, like Faulty Towers.
Yeah, in a way, but not faulty.
Not faulty, no basil.
Yeah, no, it's a great little place.
Oh, well, there you go.
It's a jewel. It's a jewel, I tell you.
A jewel. Well, that sounds like a good time. And that's it for voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN.
PTN.
We'd love to hear from you regardless of what you have to say, even if you're going to correct something.
That's cool.
Go ahead. We may not play it. It depends on my mood and how much my ego can take that
you
day.
You can be a moody bastard.
Well, you know. Yeah. Well, let's move on to Patreon. And our donut money donors. We don't have any new patrons this week, which is fine.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. I always panic when I look and I see that we have no new patrons. I just like crap my pants and think, am I going to be able to pay the bills next month?
I'll bring you some boiled eggs next week.
Bring me some boiled eggs and visit me beside the dumpster. Anyway, but we do have one donut money donor, and his name is Gordon Bird.
Hello, Gordon Bird.
And Gordon says, hello, I was listening to this episode while on a bus. So he's talking about the bus beheading episode.
So glad to do that to you.
He said he was leaving Winnipeg, heading north towards northern Manitoba. It wasn't a Greyhound bus, but a smaller bus company. It was a great listen. P.S. I was that guy pooping in the planter. Just kidding. Well, thank you so much, Gordon.
Thanks, Gordon.
Yeah. If we can get like one donut money donor a week, we're probably pretty good.
That's amazing. I love that. Can you imagine you're getting on a bus and you put your favorite podcast on and it's about that?
It's about someone being beheaded on a bus. Oh, gosh.
That's like watching airplane crash movies on the airplane.
I don't think they play them.
No, they don't, but I think it'd be cool. I want to do an airline that just does that.
Yeah. Or, yeah. Just an airline that's just called Plane Crash Airlines or Whoopsie Daisy Airlines.
Whoopsie Daisy. I had a friend that had his own little mini airline. He had 3 planes.
Oh.
His wife thought he only had 2. He secretly bought a 3rd one.
Oh.
And when he used to take people places, he had a theme song. He'd push the button when he was taking off. That old band Yaz, the British one. The only way is up. Oh, baby.
Oh, gosh.
People are like, oh, my God.
That sounds like fun. I need fun. I need some fun in my life, Matthew.
I'm your fun.
Apparently. Thank you to all our patrons and donut money donors past and present for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. I don't know. Have I said that? Have I not said that?
I'll say it again. It's fine.
Yeah, we'll do it. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot to us if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. My book, Murder, Madness, and Mayhem, is available for pre-order via a link on the Dark Poutine website. And speaking of our website, please check out darkpoutine.com for show notes and other cool stuff. Please take the time to give Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening and tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. I have a promo this week, and it is for my new show.
Ooh, let me listen.
It's called Supernatural Circumstances, and it's with myself and Morgan Knudsen.
Morgan Knudsen.
You can find us at supernaturalcircumstances.com, or you can learn more about that show. Or you can subscribe to that show on Spotify, iTunes, etc., the usual places. So please check out supernaturalcircumstances.com, and here's the promo. Hi there, I'm Mike Brown, author, nerd, and host of the Dark Poutine podcast. Join me and Morgan Knudsen, author, paranormal researcher, and host of the TV shows Paranormal 911 and Haunted Hospitals, every other Monday for our podcast, Supernatural Circumstances, as we take you on a journey for the curious about the unseen, the mysterious, and incredible things happening in the world about us. Here's Morgan to tell you a little bit more about the show.
In every episode of Supernatural Circumstances, we will take a look at things paranormal, supernatural, and other phenomenon that lie outside the everyday, like the Philip experiment, the Dogman phenomenon, and the Wendigo. At the end of each show, I'll give a quick lesson on spiritual healthcare so you can ensure you're walking toward the highest good while on your journey as a spiritual being having a human experience. Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances.
Check out our first full episode of Supernatural Circumstances when it drops on Monday, October 25th, 2021. Then every second Monday, you'll be treated to a new episode of the show. You can follow Supernatural Circumstances on social media and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Supernatural Circumstances is a co-production of Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings and Good Egg Studios. This podcast is part of the Curious Cast Podcast Network. Theme music by Corey Johnson of Catalyst Records in Edmonton, Alberta. You can find out more about Morgan Knudsen at entityseeker.ca and more about me and listen to Dark Poutine at darkpoutine.com. Feel free to email the show at supernaturalcircumstances@gmail.com. Good night for now. So how fun is that, Matthew?
I know what I'm doing tomorrow night.
There you go. Yeah, so you'll have an episode of Not Dark Poutine to listen to with me on it.
Exactly.
Yeah, fun.
Because I don't listen to this one.
Yeah, you because you can't, because your voice is in it.
Absolutely cannot listen to this show.
You can listen to the old ones, maybe.
I don't know why people even like listening to me. I'm not going to listen to the old ones.
No. So that's it for this week. Until we return, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.